There's a moment where a magical creature offers Jake a fatal wish, anything he can imagine, reality bending to whatever he says next. And Jake, holding that much power in one yellow paw, very yearly asks for a sandwich. He almost spends infinity on lunch. I love that, because the cosmic and the casual sit in the same breath, no struggle between them. And then he turns the wish around and spends it on Finn. Tonight I want to make a case, gently, that this might be the wisest character in all of OO, and then take that case apart. None of this is handed to us by the show. It is a reading I will build slowly, then test until it bends. Welcome to Pine Hat. Let's begin with the sandwich, and what it knows. And the strange thing is, the more I sat with that opening, the more I kept drifting back to a much smaller moment. One that doesn't announce itself as important at all. So let me take you there first, because I think the whole night is hiding inside it. Picture a single episode, the one the show simply named after him, the one called Jake the Dog. It aired back in November of 2012, early in season 5, and on the surface, almost nothing happens. But there's a wish in it, an actual wish, the kind that could be anything at all, the kind that in any other story would bend the world. And I want you to watch what Jake's mind does with it. Because here's the thing, when the possibility lands in his lap, when the door swings open and reality says, name it, name whatever you want, the first place his imagination wanders is not power, it is not riches, it is not glory, it is not even adventure, it is a sandwich. I'm being completely literal. His instinct, his honest first reflex, drifts toward food, toward comfort, toward the warm and simple and immediate. And I love that about him. I really do, because it is so unguarded, so unbothered, so deeply him. A creature offered the universe, and his stomach speaks before anything else gets a turn. And then he turns it. He takes that wish, that thing that could have been a sandwich, that could have been anything, and he spends it on Finn. On his brother, on someone other than himself. I had to stop the first time I really watched that beat land, because it is so quiet, so easy to skate right past, and yet there it is, the entire person folded into about 2 seconds. Read this way, and I want to be clear that this is my reading and not something the show stamps on it. That little drift from sandwich to brother is the thesis of his whole character in miniature. Appetite and love, sitting in the exact same gesture. The lazy and the selfless, the goofy and the profound, all at once, with no apparent effort and no apparent struggle between them. He wants the sandwich. He chooses the brother, and he does not seem to feel torn doing it. So here is the question I want to lay down in front of you tonight, plainly, the way you state a thing you intend to spend hours circling. Jake the Dog moves through a broken, beautiful, post-apocalyptic world with a kind of ease that most of us would trade years of our lives to feel even once. He is laid back. He is fun-loving. He is goofy and leisurely and almost aggressively unhurried. And the show makes this physical, makes you see it, because he can literally stretch and fold and ooze around any obstacle in his path. His body bends because his spirit bends. Trouble comes and it just sort of slides off him. And the question, the real one, the one the whole night turns on, is this. Is that genuine wisdom? Is Jake's go-with-the-flow contentment a real, lived, hard-won ease, the kind that wise people across thousands of years have tried to teach and mostly failed to reach? Or is it avoidance, wearing the costume of peace? Is he actually at rest? Or is he simply so gifted at letting everything roll off his back that he never once has to feel the weight of anything at all? And there's a second blade to the question, and it is the one that keeps me up. Does the fact that he is so good at it, so natural, so effortless, make it more admirable? Or does it make it more suspicious? Because we tend to trust calm that was earned through suffering. We're a little wary of calm that just shows up for free. Let me say something honest before we go one step further, because I think you deserve to know exactly what kind of road we're walking. I am going to argue over the course of tonight that Jake might be the wisest character in the entire land of OO. But I want you to hear that word, argue. It is an argument. It is not a fact the show hands you, and it is not a verdict the writers ever stood up and pronounced. Nobody in Adventure Time turns to the camera and says, "This dog has solved the problem of being alive." I am building a case, and like any case worth building, it can be wrong, and it deserves to be tested rather than just admired. And I want to flag the biggest assumption right now, in the first few minutes, so it never sneaks past you dressed as truth. I am going to keep reaching for old names, for philosophies with serious histories, the ones about flowing like water, and the ones about being content with little, and the ones about staying unmoved by what you cannot control. And here is the catch. Jake never read any of them. The show never claims he did. Mapping his shrug onto any one named philosophy is my lens, my interpretive choice, and I will keep saying so out loud every single time I do it. So you always know where the show ends and where I begin. Now, I also want to make you a promise, and it matters to me that I keep it. The counter reading, the suspicious one, the one that says this is not wisdom but a very charming way of never growing up, never sitting in grief, never letting anything actually reach him, that reading gets its full day in court tonight. I am not going to set it up just to knock it down. I find it genuinely unsettling, and parts of me believe it, and I am going to give it the strongest version of itself I can build. Because a case that only argues one side is not a case, it is a sales pitch. And I do not want to sell you anything. I want us to actually figure this out. Okay, let me bring the lights down a little. Get comfortable however you do that, whatever shape your body wants to fold into tonight. Loosen your shoulders, the ones you have probably been holding up near your ears all day without noticing. You do not have to follow every turn of this. You do not even have to stay awake for it. If you drift, and that is exactly what this is for. The words will keep going, soft and steady, and they will be here whenever you surface. Welcome to Pine Hat, by the way. I am really glad you came and sat down with me. Think of this less like a video and more like the two of us. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, the rest of the house gone quiet, turning one idea over and over in the low light until it starts to show us its other faces. Because that is, honestly, the spirit of the whole thing. One friend, one strange and wonderful little dog, one question that refuses to settle. We are going to walk slowly. We are going to look at the goofiness and take it seriously, which almost nobody does. We are going to look at the stillness and ask whether it is peace or whether it is hiding. And by the end, I want us to have earned whatever we end up believing, instead of just inheriting it from the warm feeling the show gives us. But before I let any doubt in, before I let the suspicion get a single word, I think fairness means we start by listening to the case for the defense. So let me show you Jake at his most genuinely, almost impossibly serene, and make the strongest argument I can that what we are watching really is a kind of wisdom, the kind that simply lets it roll off his back. From the sandwich wish, widen out. That one small moment, that breath where Jake stands at the edge of wanting something and then simply lets the wanting drift off like steam off a warm plate, is not a throwaway gag. It is a doorway. It opens onto a whole way of being in the world. And before we go anywhere near the harder questions, before we let any doubt creep in around the edges, I want to make the most generous case for it that I possibly can. I want to build the version of Jake the dog that you would want to be. The kindest reading. The one where his calm is not a trick or a wall, but the real thing. The thing the rest of us read books about and take classes about and sit cross-legged on cushions trying to find, and he just has it. The way some people have perfect pitch or a good singing voice. So let us start there. Let us start by falling a little bit in love. Here is the heart of it. Jake is adaptable, and because he is adaptable, he is resilient. Things roll off his back. That is not a small thing, that phrase, even though we say it about people all the time. Think about what it actually describes. It describes a man on whom the world keeps throwing its weight, its disappointments, and its dangers, and its sudden reversals. And the weight does not stick. It slides off. It finds no purchase. And because nothing sticks to him, because he is not carrying around the residue of every bad day and every lost thing, he gets to keep something most of us lose somewhere around the third or fourth heartbreak. He gets to keep a clear perspective. He can see the situation as it actually is, instead of seeing it through a fog of his own bruises. You and I, we walk into a room already half blind, squinting through everything that has ever gone wrong for us. Jake walks in and just sees the room. I want to sit with that for a second, because it is easy to skate past. Clarity is rare. Most of what passes for wisdom in people I have known is actually just clarity that survived, somehow, a mind that did not get muddied. And the show gives us a character whose whole disposition seems engineered to keep that clarity intact. He bends, so he does not break. And because he does not break, he can still look at things straight. And think about how that compounds over a life. Every time a rigid person takes a hit, a little scar tissue forms, a little flinch gets built in, and the next time something similar comes near them, they react not to the thing in front of them, but to the whole stacked history of every old wound. The fog thickens year by year, but if nothing sticks, if it genuinely rolls off, then you arrive at each new moment fresh, unarmored, undefended, seeing it for the first time because, in a sense, it is the first time. There is a kind of innocence in that, but it is not the innocence of someone who has never been hurt. Jake has lost things. Jake has been afraid. It is the innocence of someone who got hurt and then did not let the hurt calcify into a permanent way of seeing. That is harder than it sounds. That might be the hardest thing there is. Now, think about his body. This is where the reading gets, I think, genuinely beautiful, and I want to mark it clearly as a reading, as my own interpretation laid over the top of the cartoon. because the show never says this in so many words. But watch Jake move. He is made of stretch. He can flatten himself into a sheet, blow himself up into a house, grow his fist to the size of a boulder, thin a leg out into a rope, pour his whole shape through a keyhole, and reassemble on the other side. He is the most physically flexible creature in the entire land of Ooo. And read this way, that flexibility of the body is the outward sign of a flexibility of the soul. The body that bends is the soul that bends. When the world pushes, his arm does not snap. It elongates, it accommodates, it flows around the obstacle and keeps going. And the show implies every single time it animates him doing this, that the same thing is true on the inside. The pressure comes, and instead of a brittle self that cracks under it, there is a self that simply changes shape and stays whole. He is the same Jake stretched thin across a canyon as he is curled up small on the couch. The substance does not change, only the form. I find that almost unbearably lovely, honestly, as an image of how to live. Most of us are so rigid. We have a shape we think we are supposed to hold, and we white-knuckle it, and when life leans on us hard enough, we shatter rather than yield. Jake does not have that problem. Jake yields, and the yielding is not weakness, it is the very thing that keeps him intact. There is an old image people reach for when they talk about this kind of strength, the image of water against stone. The soft thing outlasting the hard thing precisely because it refuses to stand and fight. The reed in the storm that lives because it bows, while the proud, stiff oak comes down. I am putting that on him, I know. The show is just animating a funny dog turning his arm into a slingshot. But once you have seen the figure, you cannot unsee it. Every stretch is a small lesson in not standing rigid against the world. Every time he flows around a thing instead of slamming into it, the cartoon is, read this way, quietly demonstrating a whole theory of how to stay whole in a hard place. And here is where it stops being just about one dog and starts being about a whole world. Because the land of Ooo, this strange, sweet, broken place built on the bones of something that ended, this candy kingdom blooming in the crater of a catastrophe, the thing its citizens are reaching for, the ideal they are all in their fumbling way striving toward, is contentment, satiation, the state of having enough and knowing it. That is the prize. That is what everyone in Ooo is, underneath all the adventuring and the quests and the kingdoms, actually trying to get to, a place of peace where the wanting finally quiets down. And Jake, the laid-back dog on the couch, the one who almost wished for a sandwich and then did not even need to, is the one who has already arrived. He is standing at the destination while everyone else is still on the road. His ease is not a flaw in the design. Read this way, his ease is the whole design, fulfilled. He is the values of his world, made flesh. He is what Ooo is for. Let that land. The pleasure-seeking, the napping, the going with the flow, the refusal to grind himself down over things he cannot change, all the stuff that a sterner sort of viewer might tut at and call laziness, the show does not frame as a character flaw at all. It frames it as a reflection of the values of his world. It is presented as rightness, as a kind of a rival. He is not failing to strive. He is living already in the place that all the striving is supposed to lead to. And I think the warmth of him is part of this too, the way it expresses itself outward and not just inward. Because here is a thing people forget about Jake when they reduce him to the funny, stretchy sidekick. He is musically talented. He plays. He picks up the viola, he makes up little songs, he follows whatever interest floats past him that week with this open-hearted curiosity that has nothing to do with adventuring or fighting or saving anybody. He just likes things. He likes making sounds and trying stuff and seeing what happens, and he does it without the awful pressure most of us put on every hobby. The pressure to be good at it, to justify it, to turn it into something. He does it for the doing. Which brings me to the single piece of evidence I would put at the very center of the loving case, the one I would carve over the door. Season 1, Episode 25, an episode called His Hero, which aired back in September of 2010. Early days, the show still figuring out what it was. And in it, Jake says a thing that has outlived the episode by miles. A thing people quote who have never watched a frame of the cartoon. He says that sucking at something is the first step towards being sorta good at something. I need a moment with that because if you only hear it as a joke, you have missed the whole soul of it. Before I keep going, let me just say quietly, the way you would say it to a friend who is half asleep on the other end of the couch, that if this slow midnight way of pulling a cartoon apart is doing something for you, it would genuinely mean a lot if you followed along for more of these. That is all. No pitch. We will get right back to the dog. So, dude, sucking at something is the first step towards being sorta good at something. Hear the joke first, because the joke is real. The line is funny. The smallness of the ambition is funny. Not the first step toward being great. Not toward mastery, not toward greatness, not toward being the best. Toward being sorta good. There is something so deflating and human about that ceiling. The modesty of it, the way it refuses the whole grandiose vocabulary of achievement that we marinate in. But underneath the joke, read this way, is an entire ethic. It is an ethic of patience. It is an ethic of self-forgiveness. Because what Jake is actually saying, if you let the line breathe, is that being bad at something is not a verdict on you. It is not a wall. It is a stage. It is the necessary, unembarrassing, completely normal beginning of every single thing anyone has ever learned to do. Nobody arrives good. Everybody starts out sucking. And the only people who ever get to sorta good are the ones who made peace with the sucking long enough to stay in the room. I think about how much suffering lives in the opposite belief. How many people never pick up the viola, never try the thing, never start the project, because they cannot bear the gap between how badly they will do it at first and how they imagine they ought to be. Perfectionism is a kind of paralysis dressed up as high standards, and it eats whole lives. And here is this round little dog, with no apparent anxiety about any of it, saying just gently that the badness is the doorway and not the verdict. Be bad at it. Being bad at it is how it goes. That is not lowering the bar. That is the most humane possible relationship to learning anything at all. And he holds it without effort the way he holds everything without effort. And once you have heard him that way, once the patience and the forgiveness in him have clicked into focus, you start to see his role in the whole show differently. You start to see him as the center, not the comic relief orbiting Finn, the actual moral center of Adventure Time. The character through whom the show, again and again, voices its sense of what is right and what is wrong. The socially accepted decency of Ooh given a body and a face and a slightly goofy voice. When Finn is about to do something cruel or rash or self-destructive, who is the one who pulls him back? When a situation needs a gut check, a basic sense of how a good person ought to behave, the show reaches for Jake. He is the conscience. He is, and here is where I want to flag this as my reading and not the show's own word, something close to the accepted superego of that world. The internalized voice of right and wrong, except externalized, walking around on four legs, reminding everybody of the decent thing. He is the still point. That is the phrase that keeps coming back to me. Everyone else in Ooh is in motion, spinning through their dramas. Finn with his aching adolescent heart, Princess Bubblegum with her 1,000 responsibilities, the Ice King with his terrible loneliness, all of them orbiting, all of them pulled this way and that, and Jake is the gravity well they orbit around, the calm density at the center that holds the whole system together. Read this way, he is the emotional gravity of the show, the mass that everything else falls toward in circles. When you need to know how to feel about something that just happened, the camera, in a sense, checks with Jake. His reaction is the show's reaction. His ease becomes the audience's permission to be at ease. And notice that a still point does not have to try. That is the quiet genius of the position, if I can call it that without breaking my own rules about the word. The center of a spinning thing is the one place that is not spinning. It does not strain to hold the others in their orbits. It just is, and its sheer steadiness does the work. Jake is restful in exactly that way. He is not laboring to be the conscience of his friends. He is not performing wisdom or working at calm. He simply sits at the middle of everyone else's motion, being himself, and the being is enough, which is, I will admit, suspiciously convenient for a creature who likes a nap. But set that thought aside for now. We are still in the loving version, and in the loving version, the effortlessness is the proof, not the problem. The truly settled person does not have to push. And I want to be honest about something even while I am building this beautiful tower, because I do not want to cheat you. This framing of Jake as a sage, as a figure of wisdom, is one reading among several. It is mine, and it is a real and defensible one, and I am going to make it as strong as I can. But the show itself never once calls Jake wise, not in these words. Nobody in Ooh turns to him and says, "You are a wise creature, teach me your way." He is just Jake. The wisdom is something we are draping over him from the outside. You and I, sitting here at 2 in the morning deciding that the dog on the couch knows something we do not. Hold on to that. We will need it later. But for now, let me keep the tower standing, because it is worth seeing in full before anyone knocks on it. Picture the whole of it together, a creature who bends instead of breaking, so that the hard things slide off him and leave him clear-eyed where the rest of us go cloudy. A body that stretches and pores and reshapes itself, which regenerously is the visible sign of a soul that does the same. A self so supple it can survive any pressure by simply flowing around it. A world whose deepest collective wish is for contentment, for the quiet of having enough, and a dog who has already gotten there, who embodies the finish line that everyone else is still sweating toward, so that his rest is not idleness, but fulfillment, the thing the whole place is secretly for. A philosophy of learning so kind that it tells you your badness is a beginning and not a sentence, that you are allowed to suck, that sucking is simply what the first step looks like, and a moral steadiness so reliable that the entire emotional architecture of the show rests its weight on him, the conscience of Ooh, the still point, the one everybody else is, knowingly or not, revolving around. If that were the whole story, it would be enough. Honestly, if you took nothing else from any of this, take that, because it is a genuinely good way to try to live. And there is a version of me that would be content to stop right here and just let you fall asleep loving him. It is, I think, a little like building a case in a courtroom, but building the wrong side first on purpose. Stacking up every reason to admire him, every piece of evidence for the defense, every warm and flattering interpretation, and laying it all out so high and so persuasive that by the time you are done, you can hardly imagine the other side existing. You let the jury fall for him, you let yourself fall for him. The resilience, the flexibility, the embodied ideal, the patience, the quiet moral gravity, all of it true, all of it real, all of it there on the screen if you choose to see it that way. And it is the most natural thing in the world to want to leave it there, to let the dog be the sage and go to sleep. But notice what I keep doing. Notice how often I have had to say, read this way. The show implies one reading among several. I keep flagging it almost compulsively because some part of me already knows that a case this clean, this flattering, this easy to love is exactly the kind of case you should be a little suspicious of. The most beautiful version of a person is rarely the whole of them. And the very things I have just praised, the not breaking, the letting it roll off, the never quite eating the sandwich, all of it can be turned over and looked at from underneath, where it might not be wisdom at all. Before we do any of that though, before we turn a single thing over, this lovely picture deserves better company than my own admiration. It deserves the oldest and most serious words we have for what it might be, because 3 different ancient traditions each looked at a man exactly like this and gave him a name. And here's the thing I keep circling back to, lying awake with this. If what Jake has really is wisdom, and not just the lucky accident of an easygoing temperament, then it should rhyme with the wisdom that human beings have already written down. It should not be a one-off. The deep things tend to get discovered more than once by people who never met each other, separated by oceans and centuries, and they tend to agree more than you would expect. So let me hold Jake up against 3 old traditions, 3 ways of living that serious people have staked their whole lives on, and see where he fits, and just as importantly, where he does not. Because the places where he does not fit are going to tell us something too. Start with the warmest of the 3, the Epicurean reading. There is a cartoon version of Epicurus that most people carry around, where the man is some kind of decadent gourmand reclining on cushions, eating grapes and chasing every appetite he has. That is not who he was, but the cartoon survives because it is comforting, and because it is half true in a way that matters here. What Epicurus actually taught was that pleasure is the beginning and the end of the good life, but pleasure understood properly, not the frantic, expensive, always wanting more kind, the quiet kind. The absence of pain in the body and the absence of trouble in the mind. A simple meal shared with people you love. A small garden? Enough. And the wisdom to know that it is enough. He thought friendship was close to the highest good there is, higher than power, higher than fame, higher than the endless climb toward more. And he thought most of human misery came from chasing things we do not actually need, while ignoring the small, available, renewable pleasures that are sitting right in front of us. Now look at Jake through that window. The dog who would rather make a sandwich than make a plan. The dog whose idea of a perfect afternoon is hanging out in the tree fort with his best friend, playing a video game with BMO, eating something delicious, doing absolutely nothing of consequence, and feeling no guilt about it whatsoever. Friendship over ambition. Simple satisfactions over the grand project. There is a real Epicurean shape to that, and I do not think it is a stretch to say so. I will be honest though, here is where I get a little suspicious of my own argument, because there is a version of Epicurus that Jake fits a bit too neatly, and it is the cartoon version, because Jake also has a genuinely hedonistic lean, and I mean that as a description, not an insult. He goes for the immediate thing. The fun now, he demonstrates over and over a tendency toward immediate gratification and fun over careful, meticulous planning. Epicurus, the real one, was actually quite disciplined about pleasure. He calculated he would forego a pleasure now if it brought him a greater tranquility later, and he would endure a small pain if avoiding it cost him more down the line. That is a kind of accounting. That is restraint in the service of a deeper ease. And I am not always sure Jake is doing the accounting. Sometimes it looks like he just wants the sandwich because the sandwich is right there. So when I map Jake onto Epicureanism, and I want to be clear that this is me offering a lens, the show does not hand us a label. I get a partial fit. The friendship part, the contentment part, the enough is enough part, those land. The disciplined calculation underneath real Epicurean pleasure, that part is fuzzier, and I want to hold on to that fuzziness rather than smooth it over. So hold that thought and let me swing to what looks at first like the exact opposite tradition, the Stoic reading. And here, for once, I am not reaching, because the show itself reaches first. There is an episode in Season 5 called Puhoi. It aired in April of 2013, and it is one of the strangest, most quietly devastating half hours the show ever made, though most of that strangeness lives in Finn's storyline, the Pillow World. A whole life lived and lost, which is a thread for another night. What I want from it tonight is smaller and stranger, because woven into that episode is an idea that could have come straight out of the philosophy of Epictetus, the Stoic, and it is Jake who carries it. Jake, of all characters, consoling Finn, drawing the line that the Stoics drew more than 1800 years ago, the line between real problems and imaginary ones, between the things that are actually within your power to change and the things that are not, and the wisdom of pouring your worry only into the first column and letting the second column go. Now, I have to be careful here, and I am going to be careful because this is exactly the kind of detail that gets garbled in the retelling. The episode is built around a Stoic reference. That much is solid. That much I will stand behind. But I am not going to put a quotation in Jake's mouth and pretend I am reading you the script. The exact wording of that scene, the precise lines Jake says, I cannot verify them verbatim, so I am not going to invent them for you and dress my invention up as a quote. What I can tell you is the shape of the idea the episode hands to Jake to deliver. Focus on what is controllable. Do not break yourself over what is not. The rest is just you arguing with reality, and reality always wins that argument. Let me sit with how odd and lovely that casting choice is for a second, because if you had to pick the character least likely to be quoting a Roman Stoic philosopher, it would be the magic stretching dog who would rather be eaten. And yet it is exactly right that it is him. He is the one who does not panic. He is the one who, when the sky is falling, tends to ask whether the falling sky is really his to catch. Here is the real-world anchor, given to you honestly, because I think you deserve the actual history, and not a vague gesture at it. Epictetus was a real person. Born a slave, freed later, he became one of the great teachers of Stoic philosophy, and his teachings were collected into a short handbook called the Enchiridion, which is just an old word for a manual, a thing you keep in your hand. It was put together around the year 135, in the Common Era, so we are talking nearly 19 centuries ago. And the whole spine of that little book is this one move. Some things are up to us and some things are not up to us. Our opinions, our impulses, our desires, what we choose to do, those are ours. Our bodies, our reputations, our possessions, the behavior of other people, the weather, the falling sky, those are not. And the entire art of living, Epictetus says, is learning to want only what is actually in the first category, and to meet everything in the second category with a kind of open hand instead of a clenched fist. And the part that genuinely gives me chills, the part that keeps me up, is that this is not some dusty thing we left behind. This exact move is alive and well in modern psychology. Cognitive behavioral therapy, the most studied, most widely practiced form of talk therapy there is, leans hard on the same insight. So do the acceptance-based therapies that came after it. A huge amount of what a good therapist does is help you sort your worries into those two columns. This part you can act on, so let us make a plan. This part you cannot control, so let us work on how you relate to it. Because the suffering is not in the thing, the suffering is in the grip. A slave-born philosopher in the 2nd century and a clinician with a 50-minute hour in the 21st century are, in a real sense, teaching the same lesson. And a yellow cartoon dog is, in his own goofy way, teaching it too. That is the kind of convergence that makes me sit up. When the same idea keeps getting independently rediscovered by people with nothing in common except being human and paying attention, it starts to feel less like opinion and more like something true about how minds work. Quick aside, because I have to say it, I have spent more of my own life than I would like to admit worrying intensely about the second column, the weather of other people's moods, outcomes I could not touch. And the maddening thing is that I knew the whole time, the way Jake seems to just know, that the worry was not buying me anything. Knowing the lesson and living the lesson are two completely different countries, and Jake appears to have been born a citizen of the second one. File that. We will need it later. Okay, now the third tradition, and this might be the one that fits him most naturally of all, the Taoist reading. If Stoicism is about sorting and choosing, the Tao is about something even quieter than that. It is about non-striving. Wu Wei, the old Chinese phrase which gets translated as effortless action, or action through inaction, or doing without forcing. The image the Taoists loved most was water. Water does not strain. Water does not have a plan. Water does not try to be powerful. It simply yields. It goes around the rock, it takes the shape of whatever holds it. It always flows downhill, toward the low and humble places that everything else is climbing to escape. And yet water is the thing that carves the canyon. Water wins over the long run by never fighting. The softest thing in the world overcomes the hardest thing in the world, not by being stronger, but by refusing to meet force with force. There is a line in that tradition about how the rigid and the stiff are companions of death, while the soft and the yielding are companions of life. The tree that does not bend in the storm is the tree that snaps. I love this image more than almost any idea in philosophy, and I want to slow down on it for a moment because it is so deeply counterintuitive. Everything in us, especially everything we are taught growing up, says that strength means hardness. Stand firm, do not bend, push back twice as hard as you were pushed. And the Tao quietly says, no, you have it backwards. The things that last are the things that give way. The cliff is hard and the cliff erodes. The river is soft and the river is still here, still moving, having outlived every hard thing that ever tried to stop it. Strength that cannot yield is just brittleness waiting for the right pressure. And softness, real softness, the kind that bends without breaking and flows without forcing, turns out to be the most durable thing there is. I find that genuinely consoling at 2 in the morning, and I also notice how conveniently it lets a person off the hook for ever pushing back on anything, which is a tension I am going to come back to. And now I want you to just picture Jake. Picture the way he moves through almost any crisis. Finn is winding himself up, the situation is escalating, the stakes are climbing, and there is Jake, soft, loose, unbothered, flowing around the obstacle instead of slamming into it. He does not force things. That is almost his defining trait, that refusal to force. He stretches, he reshapes himself to fit the moment. He takes the form of whatever container he is poured into. He is almost literally made of the stuff the Taoists were always pointing at. A body with no fixed shape that yields and somehow comes out fine on the other side. Reading him this way, and again, this is a reading, this is me holding up a lens, not the show announcing itself, Jake looks less like a slacker and more like a small furry illustration of a 4,000-year-old idea about how to live. The water that wins by yielding. There is a related thought I want to flag, and I want to flag it honestly as a theory and nothing more, because I have seen it floated and I find it seductive. And that is exactly why I do not trust it. The idea goes like this. What if Jake's laziness is not laziness at all, but a kind of energy conservation? A deliberate refusal to spend yourself on things that do not need your spending, which is itself a thread of Eastern philosophy, the non-striving thing again, the wisdom of the reservoir that does not pour itself out for no reason. It is a lovely interpretation. It would turn every nap into a discipline. But I have no confirmation that this is what the show intends or what anyone involved in making it believed. So I am putting it on the table labeled clearly as unconfirmed theory. Something a viewer could read in, not something the text hands us. Now, step back with me, because I have just done something slightly absurd and I want to own it. I have spent the last while arguing that Jake is an Epicurean, and a Stoic, and a Taoist, all three, as if a person could simply be all of those at once without any tension. And the tension is real. It is not small, because Epicurean pleasure-seeking and Stoic self-discipline are almost opposites. One tradition says, gently and wisely, go toward the pleasant, arrange your life around joy and ease and the company of friends. The other says, with a straight back, train yourself to need almost nothing, to be indifferent to whether the pleasant thing comes or not. Because the moment your peace depends on the pleasant thing arriving, you have handed your peace to fortune, and fortune is a thief. Seek pleasure, transcend the need for pleasure. Those do not obviously belong in the same body. And yet Jake seems to hold both of them at the same time, with no apparent strain. No sense that he has noticed they should be pulling him apart. And here is the fork in the road, and I genuinely do not know which way it goes. One reading says this coexistence is the whole point. That holding Epicurean joy and Stoic acceptance together without conflict is not a contradiction but an integration, the mark of someone who has gone past the textbooks and out the other side into actual wisdom, where the labels stop mattering because you are just living well and the philosophies are only different roads up the same mountain. That is the generous reading, the flattering one, and I want it to be true. But there is another reading sitting right next to it, wearing the same clothes, and it is much less flattering. It says that the reason Jake can be an Epicurean and a Stoic and a Taoist all at once, with no friction, is that he is not actually any of them. That he has no real philosophy at all. That what looks like profound integration is just a kind of weightlessness. A man so unattached to any principle that he can pick up whichever one the moment happens to need and put it down again the second it stops being convenient. Pleasure when pleasure is on offer. Acceptance when the thing is genuinely lost. Going with the flow when the flow is pleasant. It is very easy to embody every philosophy of contentment at once if you are never tested by any of them. If nothing ever costs you anything, if you have simply never had to choose between the pleasant thing and the disciplined thing, because the universe keeps letting you have both, profound or just whatever the moment needs. Those two can look identical from the outside. They might be identical from the outside. The difference is on the inside, and the inside is exactly the part a cartoon does not show you. Let me catch my breath, because that one stings a little, and I think it is supposed to. I came into this passage wanting to make the case that Jake is a sage, and somewhere in the last few minutes, I talked myself into a doubt I cannot quite shake. There is one more theory I want to name and then set down, again labeled honestly, because I owe you the line between what the show gives us and what people have built on top of it. Some have suggested that Jake's whole posture, the hedonism, the contentment, the easy acceptance, is existentialist in flavor. The idea being that in a world that is frankly absurd, a candy kingdom built on the bones of a dead human civilization, a world haunted by the Lich and shadowed by ancient war, the only sane response is to make your own meaning out of small pleasures and refuse to be crushed by the cosmic weight of it all. It is a rich idea. It would make Jake a kind of cheerful, absurd hero, choosing joy in the teeth of the void. But I have no confirmation that this is an intended reading, so I am flagging it plainly as unconfirmed theory and leaving it on the table for you to pick up or not. And here is one detail I am going to be especially disciplined about, because it is the kind of thing that is too good to be true, and therefore probably is. There is a moment in the larger story where an artifact called the Enchiridion, a hero's handbook within the show, is destroyed by the Lich. And the temptation, given everything I have just told you about Epictetus and his Enchiridion, is enormous. To say, aha, the show named its sacred book after the Stoic manual on purpose, and then had its great evil destroy it, and surely that means something. Maybe it does. It is a delicious possibility, but I do not have it confirmed. And I am not going to assert a connection I cannot stand behind. So I will simply lay the two facts side by side, the real handbook and the fictional one sharing a name, and let you make of the rhyme whatever you want to make of it. I would rather leave you with an honest maybe than a satisfying lie. So this is where I have landed, and it is not where I expected to land. Held up against the three great traditions of contentment, Jake fits beautifully, almost too beautifully, and the very ease of the fit is what has started to bother me. Because the one thing all three of those traditions share, underneath their differences, is that they were hard. Epicurus disciplined his pleasures. Epictetus, born a slave, earned his calm against a life that gave him every reason not to have any. The Taoists spent lifetimes learning to yield. They were practices won through difficulty, and Jake seems to have arrived at the destination without ever making the journey, as if serenity were simply his factory setting. Which brings me to the question I have been circling all night and can no longer avoid. The uncomfortable one waiting on the far side of all this admiration. What if the reason it all comes so easily to him is that he is not transcending the weight of things at all, but quietly, gracefully, never letting himself feel it in the first place? I have been making him sound like a saint with a stretchy body. Three old philosophies lined up at his feet, a courtroom full of admiration, a tower built so high and so warm that you could fall asleep at the foot of it, believing the dog has the whole thing figured out. So now I have to turn all the way around and argue the other side as hard as I possibly can. Because here's the uncomfortable thing. The thing that has been sitting in the back of my mouth this whole time. The very same evidence, every single piece of it, reads completely differently in a colder light. Nothing new has to be discovered. No hidden episode, no secret line. I just have to take the exact same Jake, the exact same moments I have been holding up as wisdom, and tilt them a few degrees and watch the halo slide off. This is the hinge of the whole thing. Everything before this was the case for the defense. Everything I am about to do is the case for the prosecution, and I want to be clear that I am prosecuting in good faith. That I actually feel the pull of what I am about to say. Because if I only argued it limply, you would not believe me, and you would not be right to. There is a cheap way to do this, and an honest way to do this. The cheap way is to set up a straw dog, a flimsy version of the criticism that I can knock over in a sentence, so that the admiration comes out looking even stronger on the far side. I am not going to do that. I am going to make the cold reading as strong as the warm one. Strong enough that it scares me a little. Because the only test worth running on a belief you love is the test where you genuinely try to break it, and if it survives honestly, and if it does not, you needed to know that anyway. So let me take every virtue from the first half, one at a time, and reread each of them as a vice. Not twist them, not lie about them, just hold the identical fact up to a different lamp and watch the shadow fall the other way. Let me see if the sage survives it. Start with the resilience. Start with the thing I praised most, the not breaking, the way the world throws its weight at him and the weight slides off and finds no purchase. I called that clarity. I called it the rare gift of a mind that did not get muddied. But turn it over. Read this way, the counter thesis, the blade of it, is brutally simple. Resilience is just detachment wearing nicer clothes. And detachment pushed far enough stops being a strength and starts being avoidance. The man on whom nothing sticks is also the man who never has to feel anything land. Things roll off his back, yes, lovely. Except that phrase has a second meaning I conveniently skated past the first time. Rolling off his back can also mean not showing up. The weight does not stick to him because he steps out from under it. And I do not have to invent this to make the charge. The show hands it to me. Jake is not, by his own conduct, a creature especially willing to do things that require effort. That is not me being unkind. That is a plain description of how he behaves when nobody is grading him on it. There are moments, real moments on screen, where he is unwilling to run to save Finn. Run to save his brother. The literal act of running, of putting his stretchy body into motion for the sake of the person he loves most in all of Goo, and you would rather not. Think about how low that bar actually is. Not run into a volcano, not fight an army alone. Just run, just hurry, just exert himself. Just let the situation cost him a little comfort, and the answer in those moments is no. And then there is the bit where, given the choice between training and playing a video game called Compy's Castle, he picks the video game. He picks Compy's Castle over getting better, over preparing, over the work, over the slow, unglamorous business of being ready for the next bad thing the world is certainly going to throw at him. I spent a whole stretch earlier turning his easy refusal to grind into something beautiful, into a rival, into the finish line that everyone else is sweating toward while he just sits there, already home. I made his stillness sound like the destination of every philosophy ever written. But sit with the plain version for a second, the version with no philosophy laid over the top of it. The version a stranger would see. A friend is in danger and the dog will not hurry. Improvement is on offer and the dog picks the couch and the controller. Read coldly, stripped of all my generous framing, that is not a sage who has transcended striving. There is no transcendence in it at all. That is somebody who simply will not get up. And the unsettling thing is that from a certain angle, those two pictures, the sage who has risen above the need to strive and the guy who just cannot be bothered, are the same picture. The same dog on the same couch. I will come back to that, because it is going to turn out to be the center of everything. Let me just admit, because I promised you I would be honest both directions, that even saying it out loud stings a little. I built that tower with real feeling. Tearing at it does not feel clever. It feels like turning on a friend. But that discomfort is exactly the thing worth staying inside of. So let me keep going and not flinch. Now take the non-attachment, the part where I leaned on the ancient names and called him serene, unbothered, free of the grasping that wrecks the rest of us. That was the jewel of the loving case. The idea that he does not cling, does not grasp, does not lie awake wanting things he cannot have, and that this freedom from wanting is the very thing the old philosophers spent their lives trying to teach. Here is a colder fact to set against all that warmth. Pendleton Ward, the man who made him, the one who would actually know, said that Jake was more motivated by loot than by Finn's heroic motivations. Loot, treasure, stuff. Not the high adventuring ideals, not the saving of the innocent, not the hero's reasons that drive his brother out the door every morning. The dog, by his own creator's account, was in it more for what he could carry home at the end. Now you can dress that up, and I am tempted to, because dressing things up in his favor is a habit I have spent this whole essay building. You can say, well, a creature free of ego does not need to be a hero. A creature at peace does not need glory or causes or grand reasons. He just likes a little gold and a quiet life. And where exactly is the harm in that? And it is a fair move. But there is a question hiding underneath the non-attachment that I do not think the loving reading ever honestly answered. And once you see the question, you cannot stop seeing it. The question is this: is being detached the same as not caring enough? Say it plainly. Is the serenity that I admired the hard-won serenity of a creature who has truly made his peace with the world? Or is it just the flatness of a creature for whom not very much was ever really at stake? Because here is the trap, and it is a real trap, not a rhetorical one. Those two states produce the exact same calm face. The monk who has worked for 40 years to stop clinging to things, and the guy who simply never cared about much in the first place, look completely identical from across the room. Same easy shoulders, same unhurried voice, same little smile when the treasure shows up, and the same little shrug when it does not. You cannot read the difference off the surface, because there is no difference on the surface. The difference is entirely in the history underneath, in whether the calm was built or merely default. And I have to at least ask, honestly, whether the thing I stood up and called wisdom was, in some of these moments, just indifference with good posture. And then there is the line, the one I have to handle carefully, because the sources do not fully agree on where to file it. And I am not going to paper over that. In an episode called The Real You, which is Season 2, Episode 15, the 41st episode overall, which aired on the 14th of February in 2011, Jake gives a little philosophy of himself. Now, I want to be straight with you, because some sources dispute the season placement of that episode, they shelve it differently. And rather than pretend there is no argument, I will just tell you the confirmed coordinates, Season 2, Episode 15, 41st overall, and leave the disagreement sitting there in the open where it belongs. But the content is what matters. In it, Jake describes himself, his own moral position, as something in the middle, a medium guy, not committed to being good, not committed to being bad, just somewhere comfortable in between, ambiguous on purpose, unbothered by the whole question. The first time through, you could hear that as humility, as the lovely, deflating modesty I praised in him before, the very same spirit as the line about being sorta good at something, a creature too gentle and too honest to ever stand up and claim sainthood for himself. And maybe that is the kind reading. Maybe it is even the true one. I want to keep that door open. But read this way, in the colder light I have been holding up to everything, the medium guy is not humble at all. The medium guy is coasting. Walk through why. Being genuinely good is hard. It costs you constantly. It asks you to show up when showing up is inconvenient, to run when your brother is in danger and you would rather not, to put the controller down and do the dull work of being ready, to keep choosing the harder thing over and over when nobody is watching and nobody would blame you for choosing the couch. Goodness is effortful all the way down. And being genuinely bad, whatever else you want to say about it, at least takes a kind of commitment too. A willingness to plant a flag and bear the weight of being something definite in the world. The medium guy refuses both. That is the whole move. He declines the burden of being good and he declines the burden of being bad. And then, and this is the part that gets me, he names the double refusal a personality. He turns the opt-out into an identity. He stands in the one place that asks nothing of him and calls it a philosophy of self. Read this way, and I am marking it clearly as my own reading, and not the show's verdict on him. The medium guy line is not honest humility at all. It is the smooth, polished surface of moral coasting. It is a preacher opting out of the single effort that actually matters, the daily effort of trying to be good, and dressing the opt-out up in the language of easygoing wisdom so that it looks like peace instead of avoidance. If this slow turning of the sane dog over and over, this looking at the kind reading and the cruel reading side by side until you cannot quite tell which is true, is the sort of thing that keeps you good company late at night. I would love it if you came along for the rest of these. That is the whole ask. Now back into it, because I have not yet said the hardest part. Here is the hardest part. Here is the charge stated as precisely as I know how to state it. And it is the blade I have been sharpening this entire passage. There is a difference, a real and enormous difference, between a stoic who has worked to become unbothered and a person who is simply hard to bother because he never lets anything land. Say that again slowly, because everything hinges on it. The stoic earned the calm. The stoic felt the full weight of loss and fear and injustice, felt it land with all its force, and then through years of practice and reflection and deliberate hard interior labor, learned to carry it without being crushed. The calm is an achievement. It sits on top of a mountain of felt pain that was processed and metabolized and made peace with. The other thing, the thing I am now afraid Jake might be, is calm that was never earned because the weight never landed in the first place. Not transcended, just deflected. Not metabolized, just never swallowed. And the terrible part, the genuinely unsettling part, is that acceptance and anesthesia look exactly the same from the outside. Identical. A man who has truly accepted that he will die, that everything he loves will end, that the world is broken and built on the bones of a catastrophe, and has made his peace with all of it, wears the same untroubled face as a man who has simply numbed himself, who feels none of it because he has arranged his whole life so that nothing ever gets close enough to hurt. From across the room, you cannot tell the saint from the sleepwalker. The accepted grief and the unfelt grief produce the same easy smile, and I praised that smile. I built a tower on that smile, and now I cannot be certain, looking at the same footage, whether I was looking at a creature who had made peace with the weight of being alive, or a creature who had simply never let the weight touch him at all. Acceptance and anesthesia. The whole essay turns on whether you can tell them apart, and the honest answer, for long stretches of Jake, is that maybe you cannot. I need to breathe for a second, because that one actually gets to me. The idea that the thing we most admire in someone, their peace, could be the very thing they are using to never feel anything. That is not a cartoon thought. That is a thought about people I have known. Okay, back to the dog, and the show itself, to its enormous credit, will not let me off the hook here, because the show plants its own caution. Jake's stated beliefs and Jake's actual behavior do not always line up. He says wise things, and then plays video games. He delivers some little gem of acceptance, some line that you want to embroider on a pillow, and then in the very next breath he is back on the couch with the controller, doing nothing, the philosophy evaporating the moment it stops being convenient. The words and the conduct drift apart, and there is even a smaller, stranger version of this divergence baked right into who he is, a gap between what he believes inside and what is actually true. He believed for a while that he came from a mud puddle, that he had some humble, muddy origin, when the truth of where he came from was something else entirely, something genetic. The point is not the mud. The point is that here is a creature whose inner account of himself can be flatly wrong, whose stated story and the real story come apart, which makes you wonder how much to trust any of his serene self-descriptions. If a creature can be wrong about where he came from, he can be wrong about whether his peace is wisdom or just a place he is hiding. I want to flag something honestly. The same way I kept flagging the loving reading as a reading, this connection I am drawing, the link between Jake's easygoing philosophy and some deeper avoidance, some quiet denial of the harder problems underneath, is an inference. It is a thing the research raised, a suspicion, not a thing the show ever states outright. Nobody in OO turns to Jake and says, "Your calm is a wall. Your peace is a way of not feeling." I am the one saying it, building it out of the laziness and the loot and the medium guy line and the gap between his words and his conduct. So take it as what it is, a strong reading, a serious charge, not a confession the character ever makes. And because I told you at the very start that I would prosecute in good faith, let me also be fair while the knife is still in my hand, because a dishonest prosecution is worse than no prosecution at all. The laziness is real. I am not taking any of it back, but it is not the whole ledger, and I have been quietly leaving the other column blank for effect the way a prosecutor does, and you deserve to see the column I left out. The same dog who will not run to save Finn is also demonstrably on the same screen in the same series, a dog who can power through almost anything once he is actually motivated. That word matters. Motivated. When it lands, when something finally gets past the easy, unbothered surface and reaches him, when a thing he loves is genuinely on the line in a way he cannot shrug off, he moves. He stretches across impossible distances. He fights. He stops being the creature on the couch and becomes something formidable, and he shows up with everything he has and then some. So the unwillingness is not an incapacity. He is not unable. It is a setting, not a limit. A dial he leaves turned low until something turns it up. And that single fact complicates this entire cold reading I have just spent so long building, complicates it deeply, because a creature who can do the hard thing and mostly chooses not to is a very different creature from one who simply cannot. One of them is anesthetized, the other one is choosing. I am not going to resolve which one Jake is right now, and I want you to feel that lack of resolution as a held breath, rather than a dropped thread, because it deserves a whole movement of its own. And because it is the exact hinge on which this dog might swing back from mere coasting towards something that looks a lot more like a decision. So before I decide whether the calm is wisdom or anesthesia, I have to stop reading him from the outside altogether and ask what this particular dog, this specific creature in this specific broken world, was actually carrying underneath all that ease. But a worldview is not really tested in a debate. It is tested by a life. So before I decide whether his calm is wisdom or avoidance, I have to look at what this dog actually had to carry. and it turns out to be a great deal. More than the show ever lets him say out loud, more than his face ever lets on, more, I think, than most of us would manage to float over the way he does. The thing about the case I built earlier, the warm one, the one where he is the sage on the couch, is that I built it almost entirely out of how he behaves. The shrug, the sandwich, the way the weight slides off, but behavior is the surface. Underneath every easygoing creature there is a history, and history has a way of changing the meaning of a shrug. The sane calm can read as triumph or as flight depending on what it is sitting on top of. So let me go underneath, let me complicate both readings at once, the loving one and the suspicious one. Because the flow philosophy looks like a different thing entirely once you know the weight it was floating over. Start with where he came from, because it pays off something I left dangling a long way back. The mud puddle. I mentioned it early, almost in passing, the story Jake carried about his own beginning, the comfortable little origin myth he believed for most of his life. Jake thought his powers came from a magic mud puddle, that his father had rolled around in some enchanted muck, and that the stretch, the ooze, the whole miraculous pliability of his body came up out of the ground like that, harmless and silly and easy to tell. It is a good story. It is the kind of story you would want to be true. And it was not true. Let me sit with that for a second, because I think it matters more than it first appears. Here is what actually happened as far as the show ever lets us see it. And I want to be careful here, because the show is careful here. Jake's stretchy powers are a genetic mutation. They came from a creature named Warren Ampersand, a shape-shifting extra-dimensional alien, and they came into Jake's family by way of a bite. Warren Ampersand bit Jake's father, Joshua. During an investigation, Joshua was working alongside Margaret, and out of that bite, out of that wound, a pustule formed on Joshua's head, and Jake was born from that. Not from mud, not from anything warm or whimsical at all, from a bite by an extra-dimensional thing, from an injury that festered into a son. I need to be honest about the edges of this because the temptation is to fill them in and make it tidier than the show does. The exact mechanism, how an alien's biology threaded itself into Joshua, how the creature's strange inheritance took hold inside him, how a bite becomes a dog, the show simply does not explain. So I am not going to invent it for you. There is a gap there, a deliberate one, and I am going to leave the gap a gap. What we know is the shape of it. The powers I called beautiful, the flexibility I read as the visible sign of a flexible soul, did not come from a fairy tale. They came from something closer to a horror story. An alien, a bite, a growth, a thing nobody in that family ever fully understood. And here is the small human thing I keep snagging on. He did not know. For most of his life, the creature I have been holding up as a kind of sage, the one who has supposedly made his peace with reality, was at peace with a reality that was not real. He was content on top of a false story. The mud puddle was load-bearing. It held up his sense of where he came from, and it was wrong. Then the show pulls the floor out. There is an episode, season 6, the one called Joshua and Margaret Investigations. It aired in August of 2014, and in it the show finally lets us, the audience, in on the truth about how Jake was made. We learned that Joshua, his father, the gruff investigator he grew up under, was in the most literal biological sense his mother. Jake himself, notably, is not told. His parents choose to keep it from him, and he only pieces it together years later, that Jake came out of Joshua's own body, out of that growth, and that Margaret, the one he would have called his mother, was his adoptive mother. The roles he thought he understood his whole life turn out to be folded in a way he never suspected. And there is one more turn inside that turn, and it is the one I cannot stop thinking about. Joshua and Margaret knew. They knew exactly how strange his beginning was, and they chose, the two of them, to accept him completely, to raise him as their own alongside their biological son Jermaine and their adopted human son Finn, and to never tell him how he was born. They made a decision together to carry the truth so that he would not have to. Let me catch my breath there, because that is a lot of love and a lot of withholding sitting in the same gesture, and I do not entirely know how to feel about it. And I do not think the show does either. Now read the contentment back through that, because this is where it gets genuinely hard for the loving case. I spent a whole stretch of tonight admiring Jake's peace, the clear-eyed ease, the weight that does not stick, the man who has already arrived at the contentment everyone else is still chasing. And one way to read all of that, the generous way, is that it is wisdom. But there is another reading now, and the biography forces it onto the table whether I like it or not. What if the piece was built on a comforting false story? What if the serenity I admired was resting for most of his life on the mud puddle, on a beginning that was easier to believe than the true one? Because if that is the case, then his calm starts to look like something other than enlightenment. It starts to look like the most literal possible image of not looking. A creature so good at being at ease that he was at ease on top of a lie he never thought to question. And I want to mark that clearly as a reading. As an interpretation I am laying over the show, and not a verdict the show pronounces. But read that way. The mud puddle is not a quirky bit of backstory. It is a symbol. It is contentment founded on not knowing, peace built on a story that was never examined. And the moment it gets examined, in that season 6 episode, the show is quietly asking whether a man at ease in the dark is wise or just unlit. And then there is the other thread, and I almost do not want to touch it, because it is the tenderest one. Fatherhood. There is an episode in season 5 called Jake the Dad. It aired in January of 2013, and it should be, by every law of how this character works, the easiest thing in the world for him. Jake fathers 5 pups with Lady Rainicorn, Charlie, Jake Jr., TV Viola, Kim Kilwan. 5 children all at once, and you can imagine exactly how the go-with-the-flow dog would meet that, the warmth, the play, the no-pressure ease he brings to everything else. And for a moment, that is what we get. And then time does something cruel, because these pups, these half-dog, half-rainicorn children, do not grow at the rate children grow. They aged older than their own father in about 2 days. 2 days! He holds his newborns, and then almost before he can learn their faces, they are grown, they're older than he is. They have lives and edges and futures that are already pulling them away from him. I want to be honest that the exact mechanics of how a rainicorn dog hybrid ages like that are only partly explained in the show, partly left as the kind of thing you just accept in ooh. So I am not going to pretend I can give you the biology of it. But I do not need the biology. I need the feeling. And the feeling is that the one man whose entire philosophy is built on letting things roll, on not gripping, on flowing around whatever comes, is handed the single experience that no amount of flow can absorb. Let me say the obvious quiet thing. The one any parent watching that episode feels in the gut. You cannot go with the flow of your children growing up too fast. That is the one current that does not feel like ease when you float on it. That is the one where letting it roll off your back is indistinguishable from missing it entirely. Think about what his whole philosophy is built to do. It is built to take whatever comes and not resist it, to soften around the hard edge of a thing until the edge stops being able to cut. And for most of what life throws, that works. It is even lovely. But the speed of those pups is not a hard edge he can soften around. It is just speed. It is the days going faster than a heart can keep up with. And there is no posture, no shrug, no amount of going with it that makes that feel like anything other than what it is, which is loss arriving on a timer. The flow that saved him everywhere else has nothing to grip here, and maybe nothing to offer here, and the show lets that silence sit. And here is the reading I want to put down gently, and again, I want to be clear, it is a reading and not the show's own stated word. Rapid aging fatherhood is the thing the flow philosophy cannot quite swallow. Everywhere else, the shrug works. Everywhere else, not gripping looks like grace. But you watch him with those pups, and the same disposition that read as wisdom a minute ago starts to look like it might just be a man who never learned how to hold on, confronted at last with the one thing he was always going to wish he had held. The show does not have him fall apart. It does not give him a speech about mortality and loss, but it puts him in front of something he cannot slow down, and it lets us watch, and that watching does something to the case. And while we are out here on the edge of impermanence, there is one more thing the show told us, and it told us so quietly that a lot of people watched it and never quite registered what they had been shown. He is going to die. Before Finn, probably. And the show knew it, and it let us know it without ever once making a tragedy out of saying so. There is an episode in season 5 called Dungeon Train. It aired in September of 2013, and in it, among everything else it is doing, there is an image of an aged Jake, an old dog, and beside him, an elderly Finn. The two brothers, grown old together, still side by side, still swinging at the monsters on that train even as their old bodies ache, Jake grumbling that his feet hurt. And the reason that image lands the way it does, the reason it is not just a what if but something closer to a prophecy, is the rule underneath it. Magical dogs in the world of Adventure Time have a human-like lifespan, not the short years a real dog gets, something closer to ours, which sounds at first almost like a kindness. He gets a whole human life, but sit with the arithmetic of it for a moment, because it is gentler and crueler than it looks. A human-length life means Jake will age roughly the way Finn ages. They will grow old at something like the same pace, side by side, two brothers moving through the same number of years. And that image in Dungeon Train, the old dog and the old boy, is the show telling you without a single line of mournful dialogue where this all goes. Jake gets a full life, and then it ends. The show quietly told us, years before the finale, that the calm dog on the couch was mortal in exactly the way the rest of us are mortal. That his time had an edge to it. That the napping and the sandwiches and the going with the flow were all happening inside a clock that was running. There is a detail I want to add here because it sharpens the whole thing and it comes from the people who made him. According to Steve Wolfhard on the Conversation Parade podcast, Jake's biological age was once put at around 34, and his aging had slowed by then, settled from the frantic rapid growth of a pup into something closer to a human rate once he reached adulthood. So picture the full arc of it, a creature who grows up terrifyingly fast at the start, then slows to a human pace, then lives a human-length life, then grows the way humans go. He is not the eternal, unbothered spirit the loving case might want him to be. He is on the same road we are. He just walks it looking a lot more relaxed than the rest of us manage. And now I want to hold both readings up at once because this is the part where I refuse to let either one win cheaply. Here is the first way to read all of it. The origin, the bite, the festering beginning, the false mud puddle story, the parents who carried a secret so he would not have to, the 5 children who aged past him in 2 days, the human lifespan, the old dog in the late light, the clock running under everything. Read one way, this is the strongest possible evidence for the loving case. Because look at what he carried, and look at how he carried it. A creature who came from something close to a horror, who fathered children he could not keep at the speed he wanted to keep them, who lives every day knowing, somewhere, that he is mortal in the human way, and who is still somehow the calmest, warmest, most present thing in the entire land of O. Read this way, his peace is not the peace of a man who has had it easy. It is the peace of a man who has had every reason not to be at peace and found it anyway. That is not avoidance. That is the hardest won serenity imaginable. That is wisdom forged in exactly the fire that breaks most people. And the fact that it looks effortless is not suspicious at all. It is the whole achievement. The effortlessness is what it looks like when the work is finished. And then there is the other reading, and it is sitting right next to the first one wearing almost the same clothes. Read the other way. The very same facts explain something darker. Maybe a creature who came from a bite, from a wound, from a beginning so strange his own parents could not bring themselves to name it, is a creature who learned very early that some things are better not looked at. Maybe the mud puddle story he believed for so long was not just a story he was told, but a story he needed. A softer reality he was, at some level, content to live inside, because the true one was too sharp to hold. Maybe a dog who watches his children age past him in 2 days and does not break, does not fall to pieces, does not let it reach him, is not demonstrating wisdom at all. Maybe he is demonstrating the exact reflex that would let a person survive that, which is the reflex of not letting anything land. And maybe a creature who knows, underneath, that the clock is running, that he is mortal in the human way, that the old dog in the late light is coming for him too, would have very good reason to become extraordinarily, almost supernaturally good at not feeling the weight of things. Read this way, the trauma does not prove the philosophy was hard won. It explains why a creature might need so badly to believe that nothing lands. The serenity is not the trophy at the end of the suffering. It is the wall he built against it. That is the knot. And I am not going to cut it for you tonight, because I do not think it cuts. I want to be scrupulous about one more thing before I move on, because it is the most honest thing I can tell you. And it is the thing that keeps me from leaning too hard on either side. In all of this, in the whole weight of his biography, the origin and the fatherhood and the mortality, there is something the show never gives us. It never gives us Jake saying any of it. There are no verified lines, none, where Jake the dog turns to anyone and articulates the dark complexity of his own existence. He never delivers the speech. He never sits Finn down and says, "Do you understand what it means that I came from a wound? That I will grow old before you are ready? That I held my children for a day and then they were gone past me?" He does not narrate his own depths. Every single one of these weights I have been laying out for you tonight is shown, not spoken. It is in the events. It is in the 2 days, in the old dog in the late light, in the secret his parents kept. It is in what happens to him, never in what he says about what happens to him. And I want to flag that honestly rather than paper over it, because it would be so easy and so dishonest to put words in his mouth. Because here is the thing about that silence. It cuts both ways too, just like everything else about him tonight. Maybe he does not say it because he has genuinely transcended it. Because a creature who has truly made his peace does not need to monologue about the abyss he made peace with. Or maybe he does not say it because saying it would mean looking at it, and the not looking is the whole engine of the calm. I cannot tell you which. The show, very deliberately, will not tell me which either. It hands me a dog who carried an enormous amount and never once described the carrying, and it leaves me to decide whether that is the dignified quiet of someone who is genuinely fine, or the practiced quiet of someone who has simply never put the weight down long enough to feel how heavy it is. So the biography does not settle the question I came in with, it deepens it. It takes the easy admiration I started the night with and threads it through with everything he had to survive, and now the calm means more and means worse, both at once, and I cannot make it mean only one. Which leaves me, finally, with the philosophy itself standing up to answer back, because there is an argument waiting on the other side of all this that says the whole premise is wrong, that a life without weight to carry would not be peace at all, that to live, you actually need problems. And here is where it gets genuinely hard for my prosecution, because if Jake were really just numb, if the easy contentment were nothing but a thick layer of padding between him and the world, then you would expect him to want the padding to be total. You would expect him, given the choice, to wish for a life with no problems in it at all. A frictionless life. Nothing sharp, nothing heavy, nothing that asks anything of him. That is what avoidance wants, deep down. Avoidance wants the volume turned all the way to zero. And the strange thing, the thing that snags on my whole argument and will not come loose, is that Jake says the exact opposite. When you actually go looking for the moments where this character states what he believes, out loud, in his own words, he does not ask for the world to stop pressing on him. He asks for something much harder and much stranger than that. So I want to spend this stretch letting the philosophy mount its own defense. And I want to do it honestly, using not the throwaway gags, but the moments where Jake is being as serious as the show ever lets him be. Start with the one that genuinely turned me around. There is an episode in Season 5 called Box Prince. It aired in October of 2013, and on the surface, it is one of the sillier premises the show ever committed to. Something about a cat wearing a cardboard box and a tiny kingdom of boxes and a succession crisis. The kind of plot you would not think could carry any weight at all. But tucked inside it is a piece of Jake's philosophy that I have not been able to put down since. The idea, roughly, is that you actually need problems. That problems are not the enemy of a good life, but a requirement of one. That without difficulty, without something pushing back against you, life would lose the very thing that makes it feel like anything. And I want to be careful here, because I am about to lean a lot of weight on this, so let me flag it cleanly right now. The exact wording, the precise phrasing of how Jake puts it, that comes to me through secondary sources, through people recapping and paraphrasing the show, not from a script I can hold up and read to you. So I am giving you the position, the idea, not a quotation. I am not going to wrap it in quote marks and pretend I am reading you the line. But the shape of it is solid enough to build on. To live, you need problems. That is the thought. Sit with how much that dismantles, if you take it seriously. Because a person who is fleeing difficulty, a person whose whole talent is for not feeling the weight of things, would never, ever say that. It is the last sentence such a person would utter. Someone running from problems does not turn around and announce that problems are the point. That is not the creed of a man hiding from life. That is the creed of a man who has looked at life clearly, seen that the hard parts and the meaningful parts are the same parts, and made a kind of peace with the bargain. Read this way, and I do think this is the decisive piece of evidence against the pure avoidance charge. Jake is not anesthetized at all. He is the opposite of anesthetized. He is someone who understands that a life with the problems surgically removed would not be a paradise. It would be a blank. It would be nothing. The struggle is not the tax you pay on meaning. The struggle is where the meaning lives. Let me catch myself for a second, because I can feel how badly I want this to be true, and wanting something to be true is exactly when I should slow down. I came into these last few nights half convinced I was going to prove Jake was a beautiful coward. And here he is, handing me the one line a coward could never say. And the more I turn it over, the more it rearranges things I thought I had already settled. Because all the suspicion I have been building up about him, all those nights of wondering whether his serenity was just a clever way of never having to feel anything, rested on a quiet assumption I never actually examined. The assumption was that the avoidant person and the contented person want the same thing, a life without trouble, and only differ in how convincingly they pull it off. But Box Prince breaks that assumption right down the middle, because the avoidant person and the genuinely content person turn out to want opposite things. The one running from difficulty dreams of a world where nothing ever pushes back. The one who has actually made peace with living knows that a world where nothing pushes back is not peace. It is a kind of death dressed up as comfort. They are not the same person operating at different skill levels. They are facing in different directions entirely. And Jake, when he speaks his mind, is facing toward the trouble, not away from it. He is asking for the friction, not the cushion. That is the thing I cannot unsee now. So let me keep going and bring in a second moment, because one statement could be a fluke, a writer having a good day, a thought that does not really belong to the character. But it does not stand alone. There is an episode in Season 6 called Jake the Brick. It aired in November of 2014, and it is one of the gentlest, most meditative half hours in the whole run. The premise again sounds absurd when you say it flat. Jake has a lifelong dream, of all things, to turn himself into a brick and lie inside an old shack as it crumbles down and simply experience a thing happening around him, a small collapse, a bit of weather, the world doing what the world does. And what comes out of that strange little wish is a piece of wisdom about accepting what you cannot control, about lying still inside the unfolding of events and not fighting them. And here is what I want you to notice, because it matters enormously for the case I am building. The calm in Jake the Brick is not a shrug. It is not the limp, checked-out indifference of someone who has stopped caring. It is active. It is chosen. It is almost ceremonial, this deliberate lowering of himself into stillness, this decision to meet what is coming with open attention instead of resistance. He prepares for it. He wants it. He treats the act of accepting the uncontrollable as something closer to a right than a retreat. And that distinction between the shrug and the ceremony is, I think, the whole game, because avoidance is a shrug. Avoidance is turning away, going slack, refusing to look. What Jake does in that cliffside is turn toward. He faces the thing he cannot control, and he chooses on purpose with his whole attention to let it be what it is. That is not the absence of engagement. That is a very particular and very demanding kind of engagement, the kind that costs something, the kind you have to summon. I will hold to my honesty here too, the same way I did a moment ago. The specific lines from that episode reach me through paraphrase, through secondary retellings, not verified word for word. So I am giving you the idea and the feeling of it, not a transcript. But the difference between active acceptance and passive avoidance does not depend on the exact wording. It is right there in the posture. One of them looks away. The other, one lies down inside the avalanche on purpose and keeps its eyes open. Now I want to bring in a third moment, and this one shifts the whole argument onto different ground, because the first two were about what Jake does with his own inner weather. This one is about what he does for someone else. There is an episode in Season 4 called Burning Low. It aired in July of 2012, and without getting tangled in the plot, which involves a real heartbreak for Finn and a great deal of teenage misery, what Jake does in that story is offer guidance. He turns his acceptance philosophy outward. He uses the very same calm, the same go-with-it ease that I have spent 6 nights interrogating, not to soothe himself, but to steady Finn through something that genuinely hurts. He becomes, in that episode, a kind of mentor, patient, supportive, meeting his brother's pain not by fixing it, which he cannot do, but by helping Finn hold it. And again, the honest footnote, because I will not stop owing you this, the particular things Jake says in Burning Low come to me secondhand, paraphrased, not confirmed line by line, so take them as the substance of his guidance rather than as quotations I am reading off the page. Quick aside, and then I will get to why this third one is the hinge the whole defense swings on. If these nights of lying awake with a cartoon dog have been doing anything for you, if you have found yourself thinking a little differently about your own easy days and your own avoided waits, subscribing is a small kindness that keeps quiet work like this going, and then we sink right back into it. Because here is the thing about Burning Low that I genuinely cannot explain away, and believe me, I have tried. Avoidance cannot do that. It simply cannot. This is, I think, the strongest version of the case for the defense, and I want to lay it out as plainly as I can, because it is the part that has quietly dismantled my prosecution from the inside. The whole shape of avoidance, the entire architecture of it, is self-protective and inward-facing. Its sole job is to keep the difficult thing away from your own soft center. Avoidance curls around itself. It is, by its very nature, a closed loop, concerned with one person and one person only, the one doing the avoiding. It has nothing left over. It cannot spend itself on anyone else, because spending itself on anyone else is the one thing it is built never to do. And yet, over and over, Jake's ease does exactly the thing avoidance structurally cannot. It turns outward. It overflows the loop. The contentment does not stay sealed inside him, keeping him comfortable. It spills out toward other people and becomes care. And I want to slow all the way down here because this is the load-bearing beam of the whole defense, and I do not want to rush past it the way I rush past so much else. Picture the two postures side by side, as physical shapes, almost as body language. Avoidance is a turning away. It is shoulders rounding inward, a flinch, a closing of the door, a quiet retreat to somewhere the hard thing cannot reach. Everything about it moves in one direction, and that direction is back, toward the self, toward shelter. Now picture care. Care is a leaning in. It is the open hand, the step toward the person who is hurting, the turning of your face up to meet something rather than away from it. And the reason this matters so much is that you cannot perform the second shape using only the materials of the first. You cannot build a leaning in out of nothing but a long habit of turning away. There is no quantity of avoidance, however graceful, however practiced, that ever spontaneously reverses itself and starts reaching outward. Because reaching outward is the one motion avoidance exists to prevent. So every time Jake reaches, every time his calm leans towards someone instead of curling around himself, he is doing something his accusers say he is incapable of. He is moving in the forbidden direction. Look at the pattern once you start tracing it. Think back to that moment in Puhoi, the one we sat with a few nights ago, where Jake consoles Finn by drawing the line between what is real and what is imaginary, helping his friend pour his worry only into the things that are actually solid. That is his calm, aimed outward, used to lighten someone else's load. Think of Burning Low, the mentoring, the steadying hand on a younger brother's first heartbreak. And think, above all, of the thing this whole essay keeps circling back toward, the great central act of his life, the wish that bends his entire being toward Finn's well-being rather than his own comfort. A purely numb creature, a creature whose serenity was really just a wall, would have no reason to do any of that. Numbness does not console. Numbness does not mentor. Numbness does not look at the person it loves most and arrange its deepest wish around that person's flourishing. You cannot fake that with mere padding. You cannot counterfeit outward-directed care out of nothing but the absence of feeling, because care is a movement toward and avoidance is a movement away, and they point in opposite direction. Read this way, the direction Jake's piece travels is the tell. It does not retreat inward to protect him. It reaches outward to hold the people around him. And that reaching is the one thing anesthesia can never produce. Let me sit with that for a moment because it genuinely moves me, and I do not want to rush past it the way I rush past so much. There is something almost unbearably tender in the idea that the truest test of whether your piece is real is not how calm you look, but whether your calm has anything left over for somebody else. And that gives me the reframing I have been groping toward all night, the distinction I want to set down carefully, because I think it might be the most useful thing these whole 7 nights have to offer. Maybe the test of real acceptance, as against avoidance dressed up to look like acceptance, is not something you can read off a person's face. Maybe it is not about how serene they seem, or how rarely they flinch, or how gracefully they let things roll off. Maybe the only test that actually sorts the two apart is this one. Does it make you show up for other people? Genuine peace, the hard-won kind, the kind those old traditions spent lifetimes chasing, has a surplus. It produces more than it consumes. It steadies you enough that you have something left to give away, and so it turns outward, toward your friends, toward the ones who are struggling, toward the brother having his first heartbreak. Counterfeit peace, the avoidant kind, has no surplus at all. Every bit of it is spent on keeping the holder comfortable. It is a closed economy, it gives nothing back. Because it cannot, because the whole point of it was always self-protection. And I want to be clear that this is me offering a working test, a lens, not a law, the show hands down. Treating the question, does it make you show up for others, as the line between the genuine article and the counterfeit, is an interpretation, my interpretation, a way of reading him. But it is the one that has survived all my doubts. And by that test, I have to admit, Jake mostly passes. Not perfectly. I am not ready to canonize him, and the show would not let me even if I wanted to. But mostly because his ease, when you actually follow where it goes, keeps turning into something for somebody else. The wisdom does not just keep him afloat. It floats other people too. His philosophy, remember, was never an abstract thing he read in a book and recited. It was embedded in a whole lived life, the raising of children, the navigating of a marriage, the surviving of real trauma, the choosing of joy over and over in a world that gave him no guarantee any of it would last. And even the famous laziness turns out to be only half the picture, because the same character who would rather make a sandwich than make a plan is also the character who, when he finally summons the proper motivation, overcomes that laziness and powers straight through whatever is in front of him. The slack is real, but the slack is not the whole man. There is a capacity underneath it that switches on when it is needed, and very often what switches it on is somebody he loves. So the defense rests, at least for tonight. And it rests stronger than I expected it to. The man who said you need problems to have a meaningful life is not hiding from life. The calm of the brick is a ceremony, not a shrug. The guidance he gives Finn is wisdom turned outward, and avoidance can never turn outward. By the one test that seems to actually sort the genuine from the counterfeit, the test of whether your piece shows up for other people, he comes out mostly on the side of the real. And yet I notice I keep saying mostly. And I keep saying tonight, and I keep leaving the door open, because the truth is, the show itself never closes it. Whether Jake's whole worldview is finally validated or quietly undermined is something Adventure Time deliberately refuses to settle, and I am not going to settle it for them. Which leaves us with the very last thing, the hardest thing, the place where all of this acceptance gets put to its final and most brutal test. When the time comes to let go not of a problem or a plan or a worry, but of everything. Which brings me, finally, to the test no episode could stage on its own, because the man who was so good at letting things roll off his back eventually had to let go of the one thing none of us get to keep. Not a sandwich, not a quest or a kingdom, or a fear that slides off and leaves him clear-eyed. His own life, the whole of it. And I have spent this entire night circling whether his ease is wisdom or avoidance, building the tower and then knocking on it. And I think the honest truth is that the question cannot be settled by any single scene the way I kept hoping it might. It gets settled, if it gets settled at all, by the shape of the whole ending, by how the story chose to let him go, and by what he did at the very last edge of himself when there was, finally, something on the line that even he could not simply let drift off like steam. So let me take you to the end, not to deliver a verdict, because I am not going to, and I want to be clear about that up front. So you are not waiting for one that never comes. I am going to take you to the end because the end is where this question actually lives. And because I think the place we land is not an answer but a better version of a question. The kind you can fall asleep inside of. Here is the first thing, and it is so quiet that it is easy to miss how strange it is. The series finale, the episode called Come Along With Me, which aired in September of 2018, does not kill Jake. He walks out of the end of the show alive. His death comes later, off the page entirely, somewhere in the long years after the story stops, of old age, and we never actually watch it happen. We only learn it has happened in a Distant Lands special called Together Again, where an old Finn, near the end of his own life, has to carry the fact that his brother is already gone. And notice how it is handled. There is no deathbed. There is no battle where he falls. There is no long, milked, tearful goodbye scene with swelling music and the camera lingering on his face. The death simply happens in the blank space between stories, and we arrive after it, the way you arrive at a house someone has already left. The showrunner, Adam Muto, later confirmed that Jake had died, though he kept the details deliberately vague. And the world keeps confirming it just by moving on, because by the much later continuation set, 12 years past the finale, Jake is long gone and stays gone. No resurrection, no loophole. The dog who could stretch himself into any shape there was, could not, in the end, stretch himself around that. And I have to stop here, because I keep turning this over, the choice to do it that way. You would think the death of the heart of the show, the still point, the conscience of Ooh, the one everyone else orbited, would be the centerpiece, the big set piece, and instead it happens in the wings, between scenes, in the soft dark, just off the edge of the frame. Read this way, and I want to flag it hard as a reading, as me draping meaning over a creative decision I cannot fully see inside of. That off-screen death might be the most fitting possible form for his entire philosophy. Think about it. If your whole way of being in the world is to let things slide off you, to not clench, to not fight the river, to meet what cannot be changed with an open hand instead of a fist, then how would such a person die? Not raging, not clutching, not making a scene of it. They would go the way Jake seems to have gone, quietly of old age, having lived a long, full life, slipping out the way you slip out of a party you have thoroughly enjoyed, without needing everyone to watch you leave. The non-clinging philosophy gets a non-clinging death. The man who never grabbed at anything does not grab at the last thing either. He lets even his own ending happen the way he let everything else happen, softly, without a struggle. The way, if I am reading him right, he might actually have wanted. That is the beautiful version, and it genuinely moves me, that reading. There is something almost unbearably consistent about it, a life and a death rhyming all the way down. But notice what it also does, if I am being as honest with you as I promised to be at the very beginning. It is the perfect death for the suspicious reading too, because the suspicious reading, the one I gave its full day in court, says that Jake's calm is avoidance dressed as peace, a gift for never quite feeling the weight of anything. And what is a more frictionless exit than one you do not even have to be present for in the story? No reckoning. No moment where we watch him sit with the enormity of his own mortality and either transcend it or break against it. The death that asks nothing of him. The same scene supports both readings at once, the way almost everything about him has all night. The serene sage who needs no grand farewell, and the man so practiced at not feeling that even his death rolls off him. I cannot make the off-screenness decide between those two for me. It will not. It just sits there, true and quiet and refusing to take a side. Exactly like the dog himself. quick aside, because I owe you one, and because this is the part where I stop pretending to be only an analyst. The first time the full weight of it landed on me, that he is just gone, that the story simply moves on past him the way the world moves on, without anyone. I did not feel like I had solved a philosophical puzzle. I felt the thing you feel when you realize a person you love is going to die or has died, and the universe did not so much as pause. It is a cartoon dog. I know it is a cartoon dog. And it got me anyway, sitting there in the dark, because that is what the good ones do. They smuggle the real thing in under the candy colors. Okay, back to it. Because the story is not actually finished with him, and this is where it gets genuinely strange, and I think where the deepest version of our question finally surfaces. That same special, Together Again, does not stop at telling us he is gone. It follows him. Finn, eventually, an old man at the end of his own road, dies too and arrives where Jake is, the afterlife. And the two of them, the brothers, get one more adventure, one last quest together against a figure called New Death. In the layered world of the dead, it is the reunion the finale withheld. Granted at last, on the far side of everything, two old friends adventuring through the country no one comes back from. And here is the hinge, the thing the whole night has been walking toward without my quite knowing it. In that afterlife, Jake has a choice to make, and the choice is everything. He can stay. He has reached, in the geography of that dead world, the 50th one, a kind of resting place, a destination at the end of all the dying. He could remain there, or he can choose to be reincarnated, to go back to be born again into the world of the living with Finn. And he changes his mind. He chooses to come back around the wheel rather than stay at rest in the 50th dead world. He chooses, in the end, to be with Finn again, even if it means starting the whole aching business of being alive all over from the beginning. I need to sit with that, because you can read it two completely opposite ways, and I have gone back and forth between them more times than I can count. Read it the first way, and it is the ultimate expression of everything I have been calling his wisdom. The final, perfect non-attachment. Because what is the afterlife? That 50th resting world, but the last possible thing a person could cling to. You made it. You reached the end. You earned your rest. Most spiritual stories treat exactly that as the prize, the still harbor, the place where the striving finally stops forever. And Jake, read this way, does the most non-attached thing imaginable. He lets go of even that. He does not clutch the afterlife any more than he clutched his life or his sandwich or anything else. He releases his grip on the very idea of a final resting place and pours himself back into the river of becoming, because to a creature who flows, rest was never the point, only the flowing was. The water does not want to reach the sea and stop. The water wants to keep being water. Read this way, his reincarnation is Wu Wei carried past the grave, non-striving so complete that it will not even strive to stay still. The most beautiful non-clinging there is, clinging not even to peace. But read it the other way. And this is the reading that stops my breath a little, because it might unravel everything I built, or it might be the one moment that finally redeems the whole suspicious case. Read it the other way. And Jake's reincarnation is not non-attachment at all. It is the exact opposite. It is the single moment in the entire story where the great letting go reverses, where the man who let everything happen to him stands at the most important fork there is and does not let it happen. He chooses, actively, for the first time maybe that we ever truly see. He refuses to simply go with the flow, because the flow would have left him resting in the 50th world, peaceful and apart and alone. And he will not have it. He will not let the afterlife merely happen to him. He reaches out and grabs with both hands the one thing he is not willing to let roll off his back. Finn, his brother, the person. Do you see it? Do you see what that does to the whole night? Because if the suspicious reading is right, if Jake's serenity was always a kind of weightless avoidance, a refusal to ever feel the cost of anything, then this is the one place it breaks character. This is the exception that announces itself as an exception. The flow says rest. He says no, not without him. The going with it that defined his entire existence finally meets the one thing worth going against the current for, and he goes against it. Letting go at the last becomes choosing. And maybe that was always the secret hiding inside the very first gesture, all the way back at the beginning. Because here is the loop I have been waiting all night to close. The sandwich. You remember the sandwich, a creature handed a wish that could be anything in all of reality, infinity in one yellow paw. And his honest first instinct drifts toward a sandwich, toward the warm, immediate, easy thing. And then he turns the wish around and spends it on Finn. I called that way back at the start the thesis of his whole character in 2 seconds. Appetite and love in the exact same gesture, the lazy and the selfless with no apparent seam between them. And I asked, or I should have asked, whether they were really the same reflex at all. Whether just letting things happen and choosing the people you love were ever actually the same motion, or whether they only looked the same because the universe kept being kind enough that he never had to pick. And now, at the very end, in the country of the dead, the universe finally makes him pick. The sandwich and Finn, the easy thing and the beloved thing, are not in the same gesture anymore. They have come apart. Rest is the sandwich now, the comfortable, immediate thing, the 50th world where the wanting stops. And Finn is still Finn. And for the second time in the whole story, at the only two moments that may have ever truly tested it, he turns away from the easy, comfortable thing and toward his brother. The wish was not really about the sandwich. The afterlife was not really about rest. Maybe it was always, underneath the napping and the shrugging and the letting it all slide, about the one attachment he would never actually release. Maybe the go with the flow was real in everything except the thing that mattered most. And the thing that mattered most was never going to flow anywhere away from Finn. I find that almost too much to hold, honestly. That the laziest gesture in the show and the most cosmic one might be the same gesture, separated by the entire length of two lives. And that both of them are, in the end, just love refusing to drift off like the Steen refused, that one time, to be only Steen. But I promise you, I would not let the beautiful version win unearned. And I am not going to start cheating now, this close to the end. Because there is a third thing the show does. And it is the cruelest and the truest, and it sits right on top of all this consolation, like a hand on the shoulder that you cannot tell is comfort or weight. There is another of those Distant Lands specials called Obsidian, and in it we see Finn, grown, adult, older. And on his chest there is a tattoo. It is Jake, surrounded by flowers, small blue flowers that look like forget-me-nots. The flower whose entire meaning, whose whole reason for existing in the language people made out of flowers, is do not forget me. It is read plainly as a memorial, as the mark a man carves into his own skin to carry the dead with him, over the heart, where you put the thing you cannot bear to leave behind. And I had to put it down for a minute, the first time that clicked, because of what it means laid against everything else. Look at what the story has done. It has given the peace to Jake and the grief to Finn. The one who could let anything go is the one who got to go gently off-screen of old age without a struggle, exactly as his whole philosophy would have wanted. And the one who could never let anything go, the boy who felt every single thing at full volume his entire life, is the one left behind to carry it, to ink it into his chest so he never has to risk forgetting. Read this way, and I will flag it as a reading because the show does not say it out loud. The tattoo is the bill for Jake's serenity, and it does not arrive in Jake's mailbox. It arrives in Finn's. The cost of being the one who lets go is that someone else becomes the one who mourns. The peace and the price get split between two people, and the person who practiced the peace is not the one who pays. That is the line I keep coming back to in the dark. The one who lets go is mourned by the one who cannot. Whatever Jake's calm was, wisdom or avoidance, or some braid of both that has no clean name, it was never free. It only looked free because the universe, and then the story kept handing the invoice to somebody else. To Finn, standing there grown and grieving with a dog and a field of forget-me-nots drawn over his heart. The flowers that mean the thing the philosophy of letting go can never quite say. Remember, hold on. Do not let this one slide off. So now I have laid it all in front of you, the whole shape of the ending. And I have to do the hardest part, which is to not pretend I have solved it. Because I told you at the very beginning that this was an argument and not a verdict. That nobody in OO ever stands up and pronounces the dog wise or the dog avoidant. And I am not going to appoint myself the one who finally does it now in the last few minutes, just because endings make us hungry for a bow on top. Here are the two readings, side by side, and I am going to hand them to you the way you hand someone a thing too heavy to carry alone. The first reading says this: Jake the dog is wisdom we should envy. That his ease was the real thing all along, the lived, embodied, factory-installed version of what the Stoics and the Epicureans and the Taoists spent their hard, disciplined lives reaching for and mostly never touched. That his death proves it, the non-clinging exit, the open hand at the very end. That his reincarnation proves it more, non-attachment so total it releases even paradise. And that the love for Finn, the wish and the afterlife both, shows the calm was never cold, never empty, never mere avoidance. Because a man who feels nothing does not turn down rest to be born again screaming into a hard world just to be near his brother. That his wisdom was the genuine article, won or gifted it hardly matters, embedded in a whole lived life, raising children, staying married, surviving things that should have broken him. choosing joy over and over in a world that gave him every reason not to. That he is what the rest of us are trying to become, and the ache we feel watching him go is just grief that someone got there and we have not. That is the version where the dog solved it, where contentment was not the absence of depth but the far side of it. And the second reading sits right beside the first, wearing the same warm fur, and it says something quieter and sadder. It says Jake was a beautiful way of never quite arriving, that what looked like peace was a lifelong graceful, utterly charming refusal to ever sit in the weight of a thing, and that the off-screen death is the final proof, not of transcendence, but of a story protecting him to the last from the one experience he never had to fully have. That even the reincarnation can be read as one more refusal to settle, one more not staying, the eternal slacker who will not even let death be final, who keeps choosing the next thing because arriving anywhere, fully, was always the part he skipped. And that the tattoo on Finn's chest is the quiet evidence that someone always pays for that kind of grace, that the lightness on one back is weight on another, that the man who let it all roll off him left a brother behind who had to ink the not forgetting into his skin precisely because letting go was the one thing he could not do, and Jake never had to learn. The beautiful non-arriver, forever on the way, forever serene about it, and forever leaving the feeling of it to the people who loved him. And I genuinely cannot tell you which one is true. I have tried all night, and at a certain point I stopped trying and started to think that the not beingable is the actual destination, that the show built it this way on purpose, that the meaning of his choice in that dead world, what the reincarnation says about whether his whole philosophy was wisdom or escape, is left deliberately, permanently unresolved. Nobody confirms it. The story will not tell us whether the man who let everything go and then refused to let go of his brother was proving his serenity or breaking it. It hands us the choice and walks away, the way Jake walked away. Off-screen, leaving us holding the question over our hearts like a tattoo we are not sure is comfort or weight. There is a mud puddle I keep coming back to, the small foolish one, him content in it. The foreshadow I planted earlier and promised would matter. A creature who can be perfectly, completely happy sitting in a puddle of mud, wanting nothing, reaching for nothing, the whole of his contentment available to him in the lowest, simplest, most overlooked place there is. I said, hold on to that. We will need it later, and here is the later, and here's the need. Because that puddle is both readings at once, and it always was. It is the sage who has understood that enough was always right here, in the mud. In the low and humble places the Taoists said the water seeks, that you do not have to climb anywhere to arrive because you already have. And it is the man who never climbed because climbing means feeling the height and the fall and the fear of it, who stayed in the puddle because the puddle never asked anything of him. The same mud, the same dog, the same small contentment that is either the deepest wisdom in all of Ooo or the most graceful avoidance ever animated. And from the outside, from where we sit at 2 in the morning, they look exactly, maddeningly, identically the same. The inside is the part a cartoon never shows you. It might be the part nobody ever gets to show anybody. And maybe that is the realest thing in all of this. That the difference between letting go out of wisdom and letting go out of fear is invisible from the outside, in a dog and in a person, in Ooo and in your own life and in mine. And the only one who could ever truly know which it was is the one doing the letting. And even they might not be sure. Jake almost certainly was not sorting himself into a column. He was just being Jake, in the puddle, at the party he slipped quietly out of, in the dead world where he turned around and chose his brother. The philosophy was never something he held. It was just the shape he was. And the rest, all the naming and the arguing and the wondering whether it was depth or escape, that part was always ours, never his. So I am going to leave it open the way it was built to be left and let you carry it down into wherever you are drifting now. Whether the dog in the mud was the wisest soul in a broken world, or the most beautiful proof that you can spend a whole life, and a whole death, and even a second life, gently declining to arrive. You do not have to decide tonight. You may never decide, and I have come to think that not deciding is its own quiet kind of fidelity to a creature who never decided much of anything except twice the only thing that mattered. Let it stay a question. Let it be soft. Let it bend without breaking, the way he did. And let that softness carry us, in a moment, toward the last thing I want to say to you before the lights go all the way down. The closing reflection on what it might mean that we cannot tell, and why that uncertainty might be the most honest gift this strange yellow dog ever gave us. So here we are, back at the beginning, the way these things always seem to end. 7 nights ago, I started with a yellow dog holding infinity in one paw and nearly spending it on lunch. And I said I wanted to make a case that he might be the wisest soul in all of Uu, and then take that case apart. I have done both. I built him up as an accidental sage, a creature who arrived at the calm those old traditions spend whole lifetimes chasing. And then, I asked whether that grace was wisdom at all, or just a man so gifted at letting things slide off him that he never had to feel the weight of anything. And I want to tell you, lying here in the dark, that I have landed somewhere certain. I have not. The very same evidence reads both ways. His peace turns outward and holds the people he loves, and that looks like the realest thing a person can do. It also lets almost everything roll off before it can reach him, and that looks like a lovely place to never quite arrive. Every piece of it points toward hard-won wisdom, and every piece, if you tilt your head, points just as easily toward a softness never tested all the way down. I have stopped trying to make the two pictures resolve, because the not resolving feels like the honest part. So let me leave you where I have to, back at the sandwich. A creature who could ask the universe for anything, and whose first instinct is something small and warm. Read it one way, and that sandwich is the deepest wisdom in the show. A soul that knows the cosmic and the ordinary weigh the same and chooses the one he can taste. Read it the other way, and it is the most graceful avoidance ever drawn. A way of turning infinite possibility into lunch, so you never have to hold the infinite at all. The same sandwich. Both true. That is what I want to hand you tonight. Not an answer, just the sandwich, with both lives inside it. None of this was settled fact. It was one reading offered softly by someone lying awake with a cartoon dog, and a question that would not quiet down. The show never told us which Jake is the real one. It just let him be both. Thank you for these 7 nights. Truly, I will never quite get over the idea that somewhere in the dark, you have let my voice walk beside you toward sleep. And so I will let you go now, the way Jake might, without making it heavy. If the quiet of these long nights is something you want to keep